Bill Gates dropped out of Harvard in his sophomore year. Michael Dell started selling computers out of his University of Texas dorm room, then quit before finishing his degree. Neither of them graduated. Between them, they built companies worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Now, you might say those are extreme cases. Fair enough, but zoom out, and the pattern holds at every level. The average GPA of a millionaire in the United States is 2.9, not a 4.0, not even a solid B, a C+. So if the students who aced every test and followed every rule were supposed to win, why does the scoreboard keep telling a different story? It turns out it's not random. In this video, we're going to break down the specific, repeatable reasons why people we might quietly label as less sharp so often end up with more income, more equity, more options, and it really does come back to one classic paradox. The skills that get you graded, praised, and promoted are often the same skills that quietly hold you back when the real game begins. My name is Alex, and if you've ever asked yourself why the most prepared person in the room rarely ends up being the most successful one, stay with me. Because this isn't a story about luck or unfairness. It's about a set of hidden mechanisms most people never get shown. And by the end of this video, you'll be able to see exactly how they work and where they show up in your own decisions. The first piece of this, and the one that surprises people most, sits inside a psychological mechanism called the confidence cheat code. Pay attention to this because it might be the most misunderstood psychological mechanism in all of business. There's a name for what you just saw in the intro. Psychologists call it the Dunning-Kruger effect. The short version is this. When you're new to something, you don't yet know enough to understand how much you're missing. And that gap, that blind spot between what you know and what you don't know, exists, functions like a kind of armor. It protects you from the fear that stops everyone else cold. Think about what that actually means in practice. A person who has studied a market for 3 years knows the failure rates. They've read the case studies. They've internalized every way the plan could fall apart. And so they hesitate. They refine. They wait for conditions to improve. Meanwhile, someone who just discovered the opportunity 2 months ago hasn't accumulated any of that fear yet. They see a door. They walk through it. Here's a concrete example. Picture a 36-year-old project manager in Columbus, Ohio. Solid job, $91,000 a year. Good at what he does. He's been quietly thinking about starting a consulting side business for almost 2 years. He's mapped out the risks. He knows the market is competitive. He's worried about the legal structure, the taxes, and the liability. He's waiting until he feels ready. His former college roommate, who works in sales and has never taken a business class in his life, launched the exact same kind of consulting business 8 months ago. No LLC research, no carefully written business plan, just a LinkedIn post saying he was open for business. On he landed his first client within 3 weeks. By month 6, he was pulling in an extra $4,300 a month on top of his salary. The project manager is still planning. Now, you're probably thinking that's just luck. And look, I'm not saying luck plays no role. It does. But here's what changes the picture. The roommate's ignorance wasn't just about confidence. It removed a specific filter that the project manager had built up over years of being careful and thorough. That filter is useful in a lot of situations. In the early stages of starting something new, it can be a full stop, because in those early stages, the most important variable isn't the quality of your plan. It's whether you move at all. This shows up in the numbers too. A recent survey of small business owners found that founders who launched without a formal business plan in year 1 were actually more likely to still be operating 3 years later than those who spent more than 6 months in the planning phase before launching. The ones who planned longer weren't more prepared. They were more likely to have talked themselves out of it somewhere in the middle. 93% of American drivers rate themselves as above average. That's obviously impossible. Statistically, half of them are below the midpoint. But that inflated sense of ability is exactly why they get on the highway every morning without a second thought. The confident person doesn't experience hesitation. They're already moving. And in the early game, moving is most of the advantage. That's the cheat code in plain terms. Confidence, even when it's not fully earned, opens doors that expertise alone keeps shut. It gets you into conversations. It gets you in front of people. It signals something that careful analysis doesn't. And once you're in the room, you have a chance to learn, to adjust, to improve. The person still at home running scenarios never gets that feedback loop. And look, there's a real limit here worth naming. Uninformed confidence without any follow-through is just noise. The roommate who landed that first client still had to do the work. Confidence gets you the meeting. It doesn't win the account. The mechanism only works if the action produces something real that you can learn from and build on. But the starting point matters. You cannot iterate on something you never launched. Here's where it gets more complicated, though. Because while low information creates this kind of freedom, high intelligence can quietly create the opposite problem. And that's where a lot of capable people find themselves stuck in what researchers actually call the intelligence trap. Here's something that doesn't get said enough. Being smart is genuinely useful, right up until it isn't. The intelligence trap isn't about being too smart to succeed. It's more specific than that. It's about what happens when your identity gets wrapped around being the capable one, the analytical one, the person who doesn't make avoidable mistakes. Because once that becomes who you are, the fear of failure stops being about the outcome. It becomes about the label. And protecting a label is a completely different kind of paralysis. Think about how this actually develops. You spend years being rewarded for being thorough. In school, in your career, in every performance review, the careful thinker wins. You learn that preparation prevents embarrassment. You learn that showing up with an incomplete answer is worse than not showing up at all. These are reasonable lessons in a lot of contexts. The problem is that they travel with you into situations where they don't apply anymore. Watch how this plays out. There's a 39-year-old financial analyst in Chicago making $112,000 a year. Sharp guy. Genuinely knows his stuff. For the past 2 years, he's been sitting on an idea for a niche software tool that would solve a real problem he sees constantly in his field. He's done the research. He knows the addressable market. He's built a detailed financial model projecting revenue over 3 years. He has not built the product. Every time he gets close, something shifts. He finds a new competitor he hadn't accounted for. He reads an article suggesting the market might consolidate, and he decides the financial model needs another revision before he can feel confident enough to move. Each individual hesitation sounds reasonable in the moment. Add them up over 24 months, and what you have is a very sophisticated explanation for why he hasn't started. That's analysis paralysis in its actual form. It's not laziness, it's not a lack of skill or desire. It's a cycle where every new piece of information generates a new reason to wait, rather than a new reason to act. And smart people are especially good at finding new information, which means they're especially good at feeding the cycle. There's a related problem underneath this that's worth naming. When your professional identity is built around being right, being seen as wrong in public becomes genuinely threatening. Not uncomfortable, threatening. So the mind starts optimizing not for success, but for the avoidance of visible failure. You don't launch until you're certain. You don't pitch until the deck is perfect. You don't make the call until you've thought through every possible objection. And certainty, in most real-world situations, never fully arrives. A study tracking entrepreneurial outcomes found that founders who described themselves as highly analytical were significantly more likely to report spending over a year in pre-launch preparation compared to founders who described themselves as action-oriented. They were also more likely to abandon the idea entirely before launching at all, not because the idea was worse, because the threshold they set for readiness kept rising. Now compare that to the action-oriented path. Not reckless, just different in its orientation. Instead of asking whether everything is ready, the question becomes whether there is enough to start. Instead of optimizing the plan until it feels bulletproof, the goal is to get real feedback as quickly as possible. Mistakes are expected. They're data. The person on this path doesn't move faster because they know more. They move faster because they've accepted that not knowing is the starting condition, not a problem to solve before beginning. That's a genuinely hard shift for someone who has spent 15 years being valued for precision. And I'll be honest, I don't think it's as simple as just deciding to take more action. The identity piece is real, but recognizing the trap is at least the beginning of not being fully controlled by it. So here's the actual takeaway from this section. The intelligence trap isn't a character flaw. It's a logical outcome of being rewarded for caution in environments where caution was the right move. The difficulty is that success in the real world often runs on rules entirely different from the ones that got you here. And those rules have been changing faster than most people have noticed, because the entire economy has quietly shifted underneath us in ways that reward a very different set of skills. That shift is what the next part is about, and understanding it might change how you read almost everything happening around you right now. Consider for a moment that the game itself changed, and nobody sent a memo. The The skills that built wealth in 1995 are not the same skills that build it in 2026. That sounds obvious when you say it out loud. But most of the advice people follow, most of the internal scripts about what makes someone successful, were written for a world that no longer exists. And that mismatch is quietly costing people a lot. Here is what actually shifted. For most of the 20th century, the scarce resource was knowledge. If you knew things other people didn't, you had leverage. The expert, the specialist, the credentialed professional, these people had access to information that took years to acquire and wasn't freely available anywhere else. That information had real economic value precisely because it was hard to get. That's gone now. Or at least, it's no longer the bottleneck. In 2026, anyone with a phone and 20 minutes can access more information on almost any subject than a well-stocked library held in 1985. Knowledge is abundant. What's scarce is something different. What's scarce is attention. This is what economists and researchers have started calling the attention economy. The idea is straightforward. When attention becomes the limiting resource, the rules about who wins change completely. It's no longer primarily about who knows the most. It's about who gets noticed, who gets remembered, who can hold a room or a screen long enough to make something happen. Watch how this plays out in real numbers. A 2024 analysis of income distribution in the United States found that the top-earning content creators, independent consultants, and personal brand operators, many without advanced degrees, were pulling in anywhere from $300,000 to well over $1 million annually, not because they were the most qualified people in their fields, because they were the most visible. Visibility in the attention economy converts directly into income in a way that expertise alone no longer does. And here's the research finding that really stops people cold. A long-running Swedish study tracking career earnings across thousands of workers found that cognitive ability and income correlate strongly, but only up to a point. At the very top tier of earners, the correlation actually weakens. The highest income individuals in the study scored slightly lower on cognitive assessments than the tier just below them, not dramatically lower, but the direction of the gap is the point. Then being the sharpest person in the room stopped being the primary determinant of financial outcome, somewhere around the upper middle of the income distribution. What fills that gap? Visibility, boldness, the willingness to be seen before you feel fully ready, the ability to communicate an idea simply enough that someone who doesn't share your background can immediately grasp it and repeat it to someone else. Think about the people you've watched build real traction in the last 5 years. In almost every case, the differentiator wasn't credentials, it was presence. A 33-year-old electrician in Phoenix who started posting short videos explaining common home wiring mistakes crossed 400,000 followers in under 18 months. He's now running a training program that generates more income than his entire previous career. He did not get more technically skilled, he got visible. And look, I want to be fair about something here. Technical skill still matters, deep knowledge still matters, but it functions differently now. It's the floor, not the ceiling. It's what you need to have so you don't lose credibility once people are paying attention. But it's rarely what attracts attention in the first place. The uncomfortable implication is this: shamelessness, or at least the absence of the fear of being seen, has become a genuine competitive advantage. The person who posts the imperfect video beats the person who never posts the perfect one. The person who sends the cold email before they feel qualified beats the person who waits until they are. Being memorable has quietly become more profitable than being right. That said, there's a version of this logic that leads people somewhere dangerous. Because for every person who leveraged visibility into something real, there are many more who tried the same approach and got nothing back at all. Which is exactly why survivorship bias deserves its own honest look before we go any further. Before you walk away from this video ready to bet everything on confidence and visibility, there is one more mechanism worth understanding. Because without it, everything we've covered so far is only half the picture. Survivorship bias is not a complicated idea, but it is one of the most quietly destructive forces in how people make financial and career decisions. Here's the core of it. You only ever see the people who made it, the ones who didn't leave almost no visible trace. And because the winners are loud and the losers are silent, your brain builds a model of reality based almost entirely on the exceptions. Think about how the information actually reaches you. A 31-year-old in Austin drops out of his corporate job, starts posting content online, and 18 months later, And he's pulling in $240,000 a year from a digital product business. That story gets covered. It gets shared. It shows up in your feed 3 times in 1 week because engagement rewards it. You absorb it as a signal. You think, this is what's possible if I just commit. What you never see is the version of that story where the same person with the same confidence, the same work ethic, and the same strategy is sitting at month 22 with $11,000 of credit card debt and a business that never found traction. That person is not posting about it. There is no viral thread about the one who didn't make it. The algorithm has no incentive to surface it, and the person living it has every incentive to stay quiet. So your feed becomes a highlight reel of survivorship, and your sense of how risky a path actually is gets quietly miscalibrated as a result. Here is where the numbers matter. Research on new business formation in the United States consistently shows that roughly 45% of small businesses close within the first 5 years. For solo content creators and personal brand businesses, the attrition rate is even steeper. Estimates from independent creator economy research suggest that fewer than 5% of people who start building an audience-based business reach a point of meaningful, sustainable income within 3 years. Fewer than 5%. But because that 5% is spectacularly visible, it reads like the norm rather than the outlier. This is not an argument against trying. That's not the point. And the point is that the risk is genuinely higher than the stories suggest. And going in without understanding that sets you up to misread your own results. If you try something bold and it doesn't work in 6 months, survivorship bias will make that feel like a personal failure rather than a statistical reality. And that misread can stop people from iterating, adjusting, and trying again, which is actually where most eventual success comes from. There's a useful reframe here. Instead of asking whether the bold, visible, action-first path works, ask under what conditions it works, because that question leads somewhere more honest. The people who converted confidence and visibility into durable income almost always had 2 things running underneath the surface. They had a feedback loop, and they were paying close attention to what was and wasn't working and adjusting quickly. And they had staying power. They didn't need the business to pay their rent in month 3, which meant a slow start didn't force them to quit. Confidence without feedback is just noise that gets louder. Visibility without the ability to stay in the game long enough to learn is expensive marketing for something that never fully develops. So the real lesson from survivorship bias isn't that the path is too risky to walk. It's that you need to walk it with accurate expectations, enough financial runway to survive the early stretch, and the discipline to keep updating your approach based on what's actually happening rather than what you hoped would happen. That combination, knowing when to move, knowing when to wait, and knowing how to stay in the game without burning through everything you have, is exactly what the winning dumb strategies in the next section are built around. Everything covered so far has been diagnosis. This part is different, not different in the sense of a motivational shift or a list of habits to adopt before Monday. Different in the sense that there are specific structural moves that consistently show up in how people escape the intelligence trap, survive the early risk window, and build something real without needing to become a different person to do it. 3 of them are worth walking through in detail. The first one sounds almost too simple. Model, then modify. Smart people have an ego problem with this, and it's worth saying plainly. When your identity is built around being capable and original, copying what someone else did feels like a concession. It feels like admitting you couldn't figure it out yourself. So instead, the analytical person designs something from scratch. They build a new framework, a new approach, a new system that accounts for every variable they've identified, and they spend 4 months on it before realizing they don't yet know which variables actually matter. Here is the more effective path. Find someone who is already getting the outcome you want. Study what they did in the first 90 days, not the polished version of what they do now. Then follow those early steps as closely as you can. Don't modify yet. Don't improve yet. Just execute the proven sequence until you have real feedback from real conditions. Watch how this played out for a 37-year-old marketing manager in Denver who wanted to start a paid newsletter. Rather than designing an original format and content strategy, she spent 2 weeks studying 3 newsletters in adjacent niches that were already generating between $4,000 and $9,000 a month. She copied their structure, their publication cadence, their pricing model, and even the rough format of their welcome sequence. Within 60 days, she had 212 paying subscribers at $9 a month. That's just under $2,000 a month in recurring revenue before she changed a single thing. After month 3, she started making it her own. By month 8, the newsletter was generating $6,400 a month. The original framework gave her traction. Her modifications gave her growth. But the traction had to come first, and it came from copying, not inventing. The second strategy is what some operators call the simple scales Pareto. And the logic behind it is worth understanding, not just accepting. Complexity is expensive in ways that don't show up on a spreadsheet. Every additional product you offer requires a different sales conversation. Every additional channel you use requires a different kind of content and a different kind of attention. Every additional market you target requires a different message. Each one of those additions multiplies the cognitive load on the person running the business. And cognitive load is directly correlated with execution quality. When you're managing 6 things at once, you're doing none of them at the level that actually breaks through. The simple scales credo is a direct counter to that. 1 target customer, 1 core offer, 1 primary channel, 1 year of focused execution before adding anything. It sounds restrictive. Like in practice, it's clarifying, because it removes the question of where to put your energy on any given day. A freelance data analyst in Atlanta applied this framework after 2 years of scattered consulting work across 4 different industries. He narrowed to 1 niche: financial services firms with under 50 employees, built 1 repeatable service package priced at $4,800 a month, and promoted it through 1 channel: direct LinkedIn outreach. Within 11 months, his monthly revenue had gone from inconsistent and averaging around $6,000 to a stable $14,300. Same skills, dramatically different structure. The third strategy ties the other 2 together. It's what you might call the B+ mentality, and it's probably the one that feels most uncomfortable for the analytically wired person in the room. Perfection is procrastination with better branding. A B+ effort launched in week 3 will generate more useful information than an A+ plan sitting in a document at week 12, because action creates data, and data creates clarity. And clarity is the thing you are trying to manufacture through planning in the first place. You don't need certainty to move. You need movement to find certainty. And that connection between knowledge, fear, and action is exactly what the conclusion pulls together. This was never really about intelligence versus ignorance. It was about what fear does to capable people when the stakes feel personal. The pattern holds across every section. Uninformed confidence moves. Informed caution waits. The attention economy rewards visibility over credentials. Survivorship bias makes the risky path look safer than it is. And simplicity, the kind that feels almost embarrassingly basic, scales in ways that complexity never does. Here's the thing worth sitting with. If you've spent years doing everything right and still feel like the math isn't adding up, the missing variable probably isn't effort or intelligence. It's the filter those things are running through. A filter built for a world that has already changed. So watch for it in your own decisions. Notice when preparation starts feeling like protection. Notice when the plan gets more detailed, but the launch date stays the same. Notice when being right starts mattering more to you than finding out. The deeper question this raises is one we haven't fully explored yet. If the rules have changed this much in 1 generation, what happens to the people who optimize perfectly for today's game, only to find the rules shift again underneath them? That one's worth thinking about.